All right, folks, today we're going to talk about some code vocabulary. We're using the language JavaScript in this class to program, and we'll be talking about some principles that apply to JavaScript and other programming languages. So first thing to mention is, what is a programming language? Well, it's a human readable language that's translatable to computers. So computers can only read ones and zeros, but it would be really tedious for us people to just write ones and zeros. So programming languages were invented to have, special commands that would translate directly to ones and zeros. So in order for that to work, these commands need to be specific. We can't just say like, go make a sandwich, because to some people that might mean make a PB&J sandwich. Some people that might mean make a ham and cheese sandwich. There needs to be a specific command to say make a PB&J sandwich or something like that. And then they are tools to create software. So just like how you use different tools to make different things, with like woodworking or something, like a hammer is used for nails, and a saw is used for cutting wood. There's different programming languages to accomplish different tasks. For example, Android apps are built using the Java language or the Kotlin language, and iOS apps are built using the Swift language, and web apps are built using JavaScript. So the list goes on and on as to which tool fits which job best. Okay, here's the first vocabulary word for you. Comments. Comments are notes to self for humans to read within programs. So when you're programming, you'll be writing some code, and then you'll want to label or describe what's going on in your code so that when you come back later, you can understand what the code means quickly. This is also good for if you ever have to read somebody else's code or somebody has to read your code, then it's easy to describe what's going on with comments. I'll show you an example in a little bit. The second term here is variable. A variable is a named value within a program. So a value could be a number, it could be some text, it could be an entire image. It's just some data that we're storing in our program and using in our program. So a variable is a name attached to that data that we're using. So there's lots of different data types out there. A couple of the basics are these three right here. So a string is any text data. And in JavaScript, you'll see strings with quotation marks that are double quotes, and you'll see strings that are quotation marks with single quotes. It really doesn't matter which one you use in JavaScript. They both accomplish the same task, the single and double quotes. And then a number is any numeric data. It breaks down further into integers, which are whole numbers, and floating point numbers, which are decimal numbers, but they're all numbers. And then a Boolean is a true or false. So this is used for logic and conditionals. So for example, if grade is greater than 90, then you get an A or something like that. So grade greater than 90, that could be true or false depending on if your grade is actually greater than 90. That's a Boolean data type named after James Boole, a mathematician. So pretty cool. He got his own data. So just like I mentioned before, all this data is in your program, and you can think of these variables as names attached to the data. So think of all your data as being in like these separate storage boxes, and each box has a label. So for example, in this drawing app, we have a fill color variable that's a string. I already gave away this first answer. What type of data are each of these variables? So the fill color is a string because we're just storing the text red. Brush size would be a number. Mouse is pressed would be a Boolean. So it's true when we hold the mouse button down to draw, and false when we lift the mouse to stop drawing. And then mouse X and mouse Y would also be numbers. So again, variables, they're just little names attached to the data that's in your program. So here's a code example. Comments in JavaScript start with the double slash. So these first two lines here, assigning the string value red to the variable fill color, those are just comments for people to read, not for the program to read. And so this first line where we say let fill color equals red, the equals sign in a programming language is the assignment operator. So we're assigning the value red to the variable name fill color, just like you can see in the picture example here. And then the first time we make a variable, it's called declaring a variable. And you need to use let when you are declaring a variable. So you say let variable name equal value, and that's the order of things. And then later, if you want to store something else under the fill color variable name, you just use that assignment operator again, that equals sign, and then you store a new value in there. So like later, if we change the value to blue for fill color, then we could draw a blue nose on our little face here. Okay, the third definition is function. So we've gone over comments, variables, and now functions. Function is a named group of programming instructions. So variables are names for data. Functions are names for instructions or commands, all right? So here are some functions that are built into the processing language. So processing is the thing we've been using with JavaScript to make pictures and stuff, basically. The setup function, the instructions here run once at the start of the program. In the draw function, whatever you put between the curly braces there will run at 30 frames per second. And then the key press function, whatever you put in between those curly braces, will run whenever a key on the keyboard is pressed. So if I were to press like the A key, then that key press function would be executed. So we've got these three functions here. Let's do a little exercise. Which function would each of the following belong to? Moving a shape to the player's mouse anytime they move. So if something needs to happen anytime, not just at the beginning or not just when a key is pressed, it would be in the draw function. Changing the background color of the screen when the B key is pressed. Well, key pressed. But it sounds like it goes in the key pressed function. Setting the canvas size. The canvas is the drawing space. It's the rectangle where we can draw things. And you need a canvas first. So that would go in the setup function. Okay, so you get the idea. There's a couple of built-in processing functions, and think about which place you would put different things. Okay, last definition here, function call. Calling a function is executing a function. So a function call is a command that executes a function. It will run or execute the instructions defined with the function. So for example, the setup function gets called or executed when the page loads. So if I have a setup function that draws an ellipse, the setup function will get called when the page loads. And this ellipse function is also a function. Whenever we call the ellipse function, there's an ellipse that gets drawn on the screen. And so we could potentially call this function several times and draw several ellipses. So defining a function is when you write function setup and then you have the curly braces and you define which instructions belong to that function. And then calling the function typically happens when you just write its name. So in this case, ellipse, and then put in any parameters 0, 0, 40, 40 to make the function work. Okay, last thing to touch on is naming functions and variables. So there's a couple rules involved here. The names of variables and functions are called identifiers, and your identifiers have to be unique within your program. You can't have two variables both with the same name. You couldn't have two color variables because then the computer would get confused and not know which variable stores which value. So make sure your variable names are unique, your function names are unique. Also, identifiers cannot have spaces, have symbols except for underscore and $, or start with a number. So you can have numbers in your identifiers just as long as it's not at the beginning. So if you have variable names that have multiple words, we use camel case. So variables by default are lowercase, but if you have multiple words, you start capitalizing the first letter of the following words. So here's an example. You have a really long variable name with 7 words. You capitalize each letter of each word, and there's no spaces, no extra symbols in there. And you can have a number, but you can't start with a number. So those are the rules when it comes to naming identifiers, naming functions and variables. Okay, that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, variables, functions, function calls. We'll see you later.